Thank you very much, Mr. Evans, Mr. Shaw. I'm grateful that you have invited me to speak on such a very important topics. It is indeed a pleasure and honor for me to speak to such a distinguished audience. You know, United States, you have noticed recently that the world's attention has shifted from Iraq, Israeli-Palestinian conflict into Iran and Afghanistan for good reason. The United States and its allies are absolutely convinced that Iran is developing an atomic bomb. An atomic bomb in that part of the world would be the most devastating event in the history of the world, and I can explain to you why. Additionally, the United States and its allies believe that Iran is the largest suppliers of money or weapons to terrorist organizations such as Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shiite organization in Iraq, the paramilitary organization in Iraq, and also to Taliban in Afghanistan, for some good reasons. Because of Iran's influence in that part of the world, and partly because really United States is at fault, allowing Iran to spread its power and influence on the West all the way to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I'll explain to you later on. But the invasion of Iraq removed the most important obstacle for Iran's expansion westward, and made it possible for Iran to expand, and with the help of Syria, being able to have immense impact in the political stability of Lebanon and Israeli-Palestinian area. Because of this, without Iranian cooperation, or at least non-interference, it would be impossible to expect a long-term political stability in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in the Israeli-Palestinian area. For that reason, the United States is desperately trying to mend relations after 30 years of hostility and broken relationship with Iran. The top of American concern is, of course, weapons of mass destruction, is atomic bomb. The Iranians have signed the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, and based on that NPT obligations and terms, they are supposed to inform the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspectors in Iran of any activities they are doing on the nuclear issue. But Iran has been less honest and highly secretive about their operations. For example, in the city, I'm going to show it to you, in the city of Qom, right here, this is a holy city, right here, Qom, which is about 150 miles west of Tehran. Last year, we discovered the European and American, the Western intelligence discovered that Iran has built an atomic plant to enrich uranium to the level of being used for atomic bomb. They also discovered 756 barrel of heavy water. Heavy water indicates that you are enriching uranium beyond the enrichment level that you need for running a nuclear power plant. They discovered 7, and when the inspectors went to take a sample of those waters, the Iranian government prevented them from doing so. There are several other issues. The United States and all the 5 members of the Security Council last year, actually in October 15, 2009, met in Geneva with Germany and the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency to negotiate with Iran and promise Iran that they will take 70% of 4,000 pounds of uranium that Iranians have accumulated. They would take this and send it to Russia and France to enrich it on the level needed for the 2 power plant in the city of Bushehr. The power plants are in here, in the city of Bushehr. And also for the use in Tehran's nuclear power, Tehran's medical nuclear power reactor, which takes 20% enrichment. But Iran rejected, saying that they would not allow the 4,000 or 70% of 4,000 pounds of uranium to reach Iranian soil, but they would allow the Russians and the French to come to Iran and do it. And of course, the United States and Western Europe did not believe that was viable because Iran can cheat. There are a couple of reasons Iranians are very, very suspicious of the United States. First of all, they are suspicious in disclosing the locations of all their power plants. They have 8 power plants, and we know only about 5 or 6 of them. And the reason is that they believe that most of the inspectors, the international inspectors, are CIA agents, and they will disclose the location to CIA or to the Israelis to bomb them. And this has come to them based on the information that Syrians have provided them. Secondly, there was a historical problem with the relationship with the United States. In 1960, the Shah sent a team of industrialists to try to build a basis for industry in Iran and send them to Pennsylvania, Bethlehem Steel, and negotiated to come to Iran and build a steel mill. But the federal government persuaded Bethlehem Steel not to honor the agreement, and finally they canceled the agreement. Iran went to Germany and negotiated with Germany to do this. Germany came and began building some of the site, the beginning of the site for the steel mill. Again, the United States prevented them. The whole concept was United States and Europe did not want any country in that region to be a competitor for the most lucrative market in the entire world in the Persian Gulf, right here. Around here, the amount of commerce which takes place is far more than any single part of the world. Most of these countries have very, very small population, but they have enormous amount of income from oil. And then, therefore, they need to purchase a lot of industrial goods or agricultural goods, and it is the most important market in the world. In fact, it constitutes 37% of the world's commercial market. So Iran was expected to be a raw material, and the reason for this is this, that Iran has the second largest gas deposits in the world, the fourth largest oil deposits in the world. And therefore, the argument was that Iran, with all these massive resources of oil and gas, doesn't need a nuclear power plant or an industry. On the other hand, the Shah wanted to make Iran what we call it, the Japan of the Middle East. That was his word. This created tremendous amount of suspicion on the part of the Iranians that really Americans are not interested in helping Iran. They are really trying to prevent it from becoming an industrialized state in order to gain at least a foothold in that very lucrative market. There are two other issues that are very, very important. Iranians feel that they are surrounded by American forces. There are American forces in Iraq, in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Afghanistan, Turkey, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. And Iran believes that the Iranian regime believes that they are surrounded by American forces. And when President Bush called that regime axis of evil, these people took that as a code word for regime change. And therefore they are very, very sensitive, particularly when the people who claim that they are representative of God on earth. Let me go back to give you a foundation of Ayatollah Khomeini's regime in Iran. He believed that the rulership on earth belonged to God. From God goes to Prophet Muhammad. From Prophet Muhammad goes to 12 imams, Shiites imam. From the Shiites imam, the 12th one was a very young man. He disappeared. And they believed that he will return someday and bring peace and security to the world. And his absence, the faqih means the top theologian, is the representatives of the hidden imam. Therefore, he is indirect representative of God on earth, so he will do everything he wants, that he believes that God wants him to do. And incidentally, that will come later on when I discuss the 2009, June 12, 2009 elections and the reaction of the regime toward the demonstrators. That has a great deal to do with this, because the regime believed that anybody who is against the supreme leader, or Ayatollah Khomeini in this case, he is against God. Therefore, it has to be eliminated. So they would use everything to eliminate the opposition at all costs. Anyway, for the people who believe in this, you call them the axis of evil. It is very, very hard for them to accept that. Whether they believe it or not, you guys know that this idea of being representative of God or Christ on earth is not anything new. The popes in Middle Ages, during the so-called the Holy Roman Empire, they used this concept, which was really discredited. They used this concept to rule both temporal and spiritual realm of the society, and you know how much damages did to Christianity, to religion, and how much atrocity committed in the name of God and religion. And so ultimately it ended up with 30 years of religious war from 618 to 648. And Renaissance and Reformations, and ultimately they forced the Pope to go back to Vatican and only be concerned for the spiritual needs of the society. So Iranians are doing exactly the replica. This is a replica of what we experienced in Western Europe, and it didn't work. It was a claim, and this is also a claim. The leaders may believe themselves a claim, but they pretend that it is really true. And consequently, they have a lot of true believers. You remember Jim Jones taking almost 1,000 people from San Francisco and took them to Latin America and ordered them to eat Kool-Aid, which was poison, and killed every one of them. They were the true believers, using the words of Erich Fromm. He was a very famous American writer in San Francisco. In 1962, he wrote a book. It's called The True Believers. That you could have a simple idea and tested idea and repeat that over and over again, and you can brainwash millions of people who would be willing to put their lives on the line. Let me give you an example. 1977, I was invited by West German government, Minister of Foreign Affairs to be exact, to visit West Germany, and they invited me to a variety of organizations and universities to consult with their experts on Middle East. One, Dieter Braun, who was one of the outstanding German intellectuals knowledgeable about Middle East politics. He invited me to the University of Munich. I went to his Institute for Near Eastern Study, and the minute I walked into to his office, there was a great big poster of Karl Marx. I was absolutely startled. And here it was West Germany. It was a capitalist country. And I turned to Professor Brown and said, Professor Brown, what the hell is going on here? Who is this? He said, why don't you read the caption? Of course, the caption was in German. And I said, well, I don't understand German. Would you translate it in English to me? He said, I'll be happy to do that. And the caption read, folks, I'm terribly sorry. It was just an idea. How many people lost their lives for that just little idea? Okay, so here Iranians now have almost, that's why it is so hard to invade the country, because they have those true believers who will put their lives. 600,000 of them went into the minefields of Iraqis during the 1980-88 war, and every one of them are blown up because the spiritual leader told them that if you are blown up, you will go directly to the heaven, and 72 beautiful angels are waiting for you at heaven. Okay, there are so many stupid people who do that right now. Every year they're blowing themselves up. Okay, so that's a tragedy, that you could get a simple idea of communism or the German superior race, or Ayatollah Khomeini's concept that Faqih, the top theologian, is representative of God on earth, and he can do whatever he wants. Guys, remember what happened. 35 million votes were cast in 2009, June 12, 2009. And these were paper ballots. And normally it would take 3 days and nights to count the ballots. Within 3 hours, Ayatollah Khamenei, the spiritual leader, came on television. He says that I've already determined that Mr. Ahmadinejad has won the election because it was, quote unquote, a divine assessment. Okay. And millions of people ran into the street, extremely angry. Almost 22 million of them had voted for Mr. Mousavi. They said, what happened to our vote? What happened to our vote? And then began calling Mr. Ayatollah Khamenei a dictator. And that day, I can tell you that day, that concept of Velayat Faqih, that the Ayatollah is representative of God on earth, received a tremendous blow, a fatal blow. Now, more than 60-70% of Iranians no longer believe that God has anything to do with running of the government. Okay, and no matter how brutally the regime brutalized, suppressed the opposition, the so-called Green Movement. They are here to stay. It's a tremendous number of Iranians believe that the justice was stepped upon by Ayatollah Khamenei, and ultimately they are going to do something to turn things around and establish democracy in Iran. Recently, incidentally, immediately after, about 9 months after Ayatollah Khomeini had taken over the government, one of my former students from Tehran University had come to Canada. He called me from Canada, and I asked him simply, I said, could you just generally tell me what happened after Ayatollah Khomeini took over the government? He said, Dr. Amirie, what happened is this. Ayatollah Khomeini came, and these are his exact words, pulled us all out of a pothole and dropped us into a deep well. And recently I received from another student an email who said, now the only thing we have free in this country is breathing. Nothing else is free. So let me go back to the concept of the nuclear issue. The nuclear issue is so important that even the talk of nuclear, that Iran is going to develop nuclear weapons, already made many of the countries in this region extremely, extremely anxious and extremely nervous. Last year, 4 countries, Kuwait,
You cannot see that.
No.
We cannot see
You
it.
cannot see it. Okay, I'm sorry. Kuwait, I'll tell you. Yeah, there's not enough light in here. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates asked President Obama to send Patriot anti-missile defense system, which he deployed with the associated cruise missile, because they want to be prepared. And one issue that I'm going to tell you is very, very important. There's a conflict between the Shiites and the Sunnis. Iranians are Shiites. 94% of the population of Iran is Shiites. The history of hatred between the Shiites and the Sunnis go back to the day Muhammad died, the Prophet Muhammad died. And I explain this in detail in my autobiography, The Unparalleled Journey, right here in this book, okay? And I want to tell you, I honored you today by wearing the same suit that I wore when I met President Reagan 33 years ago. That's exactly the only thing that's changed, because I used the same picture that I met President Reagan in the book. The only thing that changes is the tie. This one is a silk tie and this one is not. But the rest of them is the same. But anyway, the question of the nuclear issue has made not only all the countries in the Persian Gulf are Sunnis, every one of them with the exception of Iraq. The rest of them are run by Sunnis emirs. And the Sunnis very much afraid of Iranians, extremely. During the Shah, where religion had nothing to do with foreign policy, the Shah was able to get along with them because they are all monarchies. But now these new regimes are very, very, new regime in Tehran is very, very hostile, or at least they consider it hostile. And the hatred between the two is 10 times or even 50 times more deep than the hatred between the Catholic and Protestant in Northern Ireland. Recently, just in fact the day before yesterday, the headline on the first page of Los Angeles Times read that Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has a secret military force directly under his office, where he where that secret force had arrested 431 Sunni quote-unquote insurgents and put them in this secret jail, and they had been mistreating him, and they had been torturing them every day. And finally, after somebody found out, he admitted that yes, there was there, and they took the prisoners and moved them to another prison. That will happen all the time. Let me tell you something fundamental. Nothing will happen in Iraq unless it is a very, very strong force. The only way you can keep the two separate is by force. That's what the Saddam Hussein did. I'm an American citizen, that's why I say we. If we move our forces completely from Iraq, I can tell you 5 or 10 years from that time, Iraq would not be any different than it was under Saddam Hussein. Somebody is going to be a dictator in order to keep, and if they don't do it, the country will fall apart. Okay, so I believe it was a colossal mistake to attack Iran for the two reasons I mentioned. Number one, to open the wound between the Shiites and the Sunnis. The Sunnis constitute 90% of the Islamic population in the world. The Shiites constitute 10%. And the Sunnis have been considering the Shiites heretics and revolutionary, and they suppress them whenever they can. Saddam Hussein killed as many as 200,000 of them, okay? And they have been suppressing them all these centuries, and they treat them as a second-class citizen. And you know, every day you hear that the Sunnis in India, in Pakistan, in all Muslim countries are bombing the Shiites' mosque. This is going to happen. It's going to continue to go. There's nothing that you can. There is no way, in my opinion, that you can close the gap between these two Islamic sects, and you can bridge the gap between them. It is possible to bridge the gap between the Catholic and Protestant in Northern Ireland, but I don't think you will be able to bridge the gap between the Sunnis. Therefore, these Sunnis on the Persian Gulf are very, very nervous that if the Iran becomes a nuclear weapon state, it would cause enormous amount of fear and anxiety, not only among them, but also among the in Israel and many other countries. That some of the Sunni countries, such as Egypt, even Turkey, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and others might follow the Iranian suit. And the thing is this, the point that I want you to understand that's very important. Whoever controls the oil in the world controls the destiny of the world. And the United States has put its umbrella over the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf, I'm going to get to it. In fact, let me go back and say earlier, today, in spite of all the effort in finding an alternative source of energy, is still 90% of the world's industry, transportation, agriculture, and military run by fossil fuel. And with all the effort we have done, we have basically able to bring a substitute for about less than 10%. And at the same time, the need of the world every year would go up by about roughly 7%, because there will be more industrialization, particularly the countries like India and China. And industrialization is based on fossil fuel, because there is no alternative. So they are building it on the oil, so that oil is going on. In fact, as early as 1928, Sir Arnold Wilson, one of the most outstanding British historians, said, and I'm going to quote what he said in his famous classical book for Persian Gulf. He said, and I quote, "No arm of the sea has been or is of greater interest alike to the geologists, historians, archaeologists, geographers, merchants, statesmen, and the students of strategy that the inland water named Persian Gulf. This was 1928. Today, 82 years after Sir Arnold wrote that word, in fact, the Persian Gulf has become far more important than it was during his time. This region has only 3% of the world's population, but they control 60% of the world's known oil and currently provide 47% of the world's oil need, the daily oil consumption of the world. So it is very, very important. Whoever controls the Persian Gulf can control the destiny of the world, because the world economies depend on oil. Can you imagine if the price of oil goes up to $6, what's going to happen to our economy in this country? And even a shot in the Persian Gulf immediately get the stock prices down and raise the price of oil, because every other commodity that we sell in this country is directly connected with the price of oil. So for this reason, from 1971, when the British withdrew from that area, British was the dominant force in the Persian Gulf for two and a half centuries. When the British withdrew from the area, and the Vietnam War was present in American mind, in the public mind, the United States under President Nixon didn't want to send another segment of American forces into Asia. So they empowered the Shah of Iran to be the policeman of the Persian Gulf. So they sold approximately $100 billion worth of military equipment to the Shah. And many of those equipment, I can tell you firsthand, the Iranian armed forces could not have used. And they just went, they became, metal, like metal sitting in the storage room. But Iranian really suffered a great deal, and many Iranians resented that Iran had to pay for security of the Persian Gulf, where the Persian Gulf, the countries which profited from the Persian Gulf were countries like Japan, India, Western Europe, and other United States and others. They should have been paying the bill rather than the Iranians. But at any rate, when the Shah's government fell, which again in my autobiography, I was very, very close. I was the one who established for the Shah the Iranian Institute for International Political and Economic Studies to advise him on foreign policy, and I was personally the person who advised him. We will study the issue that he was interested. He will come to me. I would summarize it, and I send it to his special secretary from my secretary. So he would, in fact, in the book, you see a letter from him thanking me for advising him on certain issues that I had advised him during that period. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to tell you is this: I was there. I know exactly how the people of Iran felt. But the situation after the Shah fell, and I give this really very, very insightful reasons why he fell after 2,500 years of monarchy. The monarchy was destroyed. The United States decided they had no alternative. They had to take the security of the Persian Gulf on their own, under their own control. So on January 23rd, 2080, because I want to be completely accurate. January 23rd, 2080, President Carter, in the State of the Union, stated, and I quote, "Any attempt by any force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault to the vital interest of the United States, and such an assault will be repelled at all costs, including the military force. You remember when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Immediately we sent 500,000 men and women to Saudi Arabia to repel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. That was based on the Carter. This is called the Carter Doctrine. So ever since the Carter Doctrine, the Persian Gulf has come under American umbrella, and now they can also put it under American nuclear umbrella if situation got worse in this area. For that reason, United States, one of the main reasons that we have stayed as a superpower is our control in that vital part of the world. Whoever, again, I'm going to state that, whoever controls oil in the world can control the destiny of the world. Okay? So there are so many issues that made the Iranians extremely angry. The American foreign policy toward Iran up to 1953 was mainly benevolent, with the exception of World War II, that the United States had no choice but uniting with Britain and Soviet Union to supply Soviet Union with war material from the Persian Gulf, here from the Iranian railroad from here to the Russian, to the Caspian Sea. Therefore, with that exception, the United States foreign policy from the middle of the 18th century to 1953 was benevolent. In 1953, it turned to destructive as far as the Iranian political development was concerned. Dr. Mossadegh was a very highly educated man. He got his PhD from Sorbonne University. He was very, very liberal, and he was the one who was establishing democratic secular institution in Iran. And during his rule from 1951 to 53, where we had really an ideal democracy in the country, which was really taking roots in the country. But the CIA in 1953, with the help of British MI6, CIA staged a coup against Mossadegh because of the conflict Mossadegh had with Britain, who had controlled Iranian oil for almost 50 years and really cheated Iranians on their share. For example, the British were supposed to pay Iranian 30% of the profit, but later on we found out at no time they paid more than 9% after it went to the International Court of Justice. The final argument between the Mossadegh and Britain was this. Mossadegh said that you have to give us 50% because American in the Saudi Arabia, Aramco, has given the Saudis a 50-50 proposition, a new contract. And they wanted 50%. And the second term that Mossadegh wanted from Britain was that we should allow the Iranian to audit their book, because that was the reason, the source of the cheating. Britain refused both of them. And therefore, consequently, there was a conflict between them. It went to the United Nations, it went to Security Council, and President Truman sided with Iran and saying that Iran had a right to nationalize its oil and blame Britain for what had happened. And the British waited until until Eisenhower became president in 1952, and in 1953 Eisenhower appointed two brothers who were both lawyers and working for a firm in New York, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. John Foster Dulles became the Secretary of State. Allen Dulles became the head of the CIA. And both of them had, incidentally, for your information, one of the major clientele of the company, of the firm, the law firm, was the Standard Oil of New Jersey. And up to then, the United States had no share of Iranian oil. So finally, they staged a coup, and ultimately Mossadegh was overthrown, and they brought the Shah back. He had fled to Rome, and brought him back, put him in power, established the CIA, established for him a secret police, it's called Savak, and made it possible for the Shah to rule for the next 26 years. Consequently, Iranians were really the psychological impact of that coup was devastating to Iranians. I was there, believe me, I was a sergeant in the Iranian Air Force. I was there. Mossadegh had the support of at least 90% of the population at that time. If we went over the radio and called Iranian to come to the street, there won't be anybody, including old men and women, who would not come to the street, and nothing would be moved in the city. So the Iranians became so devastated with what happened to them that and the intensity of hatred toward the Shah, because the Shah had collided with CIA. The Shah and the United States was so great, so deep and widespread that they didn't care what kind of regime Mossadegh, or what kind of regime Ayatollah Khomeini is going to replace the Shah's regime, so long as he got rid of the Shah and American presence on Iran. And only after the fall of the Shah, the hostage crisis, the spread of international terrorism, did Americans wonder why Iranians hated them so much. It took the federal government 47 years to acknowledge the reason, and I'm going to cite the reason for you. On March 17, 2000, the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, in CNN Insight, publicly stated, and I quote, "In 1953, the United States played a significant role in overthrowing Iran's popular Prime Minister, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. The coup was clearly a setback for Iran's political development. It is easy to see why so many Iranians continue to resent America's interference in their internal affairs," at the end of the quote. Now, Mrs. Albright talks about setback. What is setback? To my estimation, the revolution would have never taken place if Mossadegh had remained in power. Remember when they took the American embassy and the hostages? You know why? Because it was in that embassy where the 1953 coup was planned. And that was the reason. And the Shah was outside of the country. And now the Shah was in the United States, actually, in New York. And they thought they were going to replicate what they did in 1953. So what happened, the seed of revolution, took place in 1953 and ultimately bear fruit in 1979. And now Iranians have to suffer under this very, very oppressive regime. So the revolution would not have happened. The hostage taken would not have taken place. Soviet Union would not have invaded Afghanistan. Saddam Hussein would not have invaded Kuwait in 1990, and it would not invaded Iran in 1980, and Kuwait in 1990, and the Gulf War in 1991 would not have been necessary. The September 11 would not have happened. United States invasion of Afghanistan in 2000 and Iraq in 2003 would have been absolutely unnecessary, and international terrorism could have been prevented. This is what happened by just taking a revolution against a popular and a democratic regime. The present regime is not a democratic regime. It is a dictatorial regime. So it is different from that regime. So that was what happened. The second source of Iranian resentment was 1980-88 war. The Iranian regime believed that the United States encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade Iran. And the United States gave massive support to Saddam Hussein during that eight years war. You remember, during the war, an Iranian commercial flight, Iran Air, was shot down by American missiles, and 293 people lost their lives. And the United States government allowed the American chemical industry to sell to Saddam Hussein whatever he needed to put together chemical weapons. And both Americans and particularly Germans, they gave him all kinds of ingredients, and he put down those weapons, and those weapons killed as many as 200,000 Iranians and many, many other civilians. You remember that city of Halabja, where 2,800 people, men and women and all the cattle were destroyed. So this present regime is very, very important. When the Shah, let me go back and say something about Iran. That's very, very instrumental to understand where we are at the present time. Iran is an ancient country. I'm going to go back to the history, but I'll go away very quickly. In 1,500 years before Christ, a large number of the Aryan tribes from the Central Asia, from Central Asia moved and settled in this part of the Iran's plateau. It is called Fars. At the time, it was called Pars, P-A-R-S. It is now called Fars, F-A-R-S, and Farsi, the language, comes from that word. And in 563 BC, a young nobleman, his name was Cyrus, he began organizing these Aryan tribes, and finally he organized them to almost to a superpower. It's called Achaemenid dynasty. And in 550 BC, he was crowned as the king of Iran. Guys, I want you to know that no one in Iran will know what Persia means. Persia is a Greek word, was put down by the Greek. From 2,000 Iranian, one of them might know what the word means. To the Iran, ever since 550 BC, this country has been called Iran, like E, capital E-R-O-N. Iran means land of Aryans. And my name, Arya, means Aryans, means Aryan. And the Iranians are totally different culturally from the Arabs. They are not from Semitic tribes, where the Arabs are from Semitic tribes. So if you call an Iranian an Arab, he would resent that, and I'm sure if you call an Arab an Iranian, he would also resent that. But this country is started, and Cyrus gave the Iranian its birth certificate, like what George Washington gave us our birth certificate. And the one thing Cyrus did in 639 BC, which most of you who have read Bible have read that, he defeated the despotic Babylonian king and freed the Jews from Babylonian captivities, allowed them to go to Jerusalem, go to Judea, and give them grant to rebuild their temple. And immediately on the same year, he issued a proclamation. In the proclamation, it is called Cyrus the Great cylinder. It is in the form of a cylinder because it's in cuneiform language. And the original of the cylinder is in the British Museum, and the replica is in the United Nations General Assembly. What Cyrus did then, it would amaze you. He abolished slavery. That is his number one. Number two, he gave political freedom to all the people in his kingdom. Political and ethnic freedom. He forbade taking private property by force. He also forbade mistreating the war prisoners. And he actually ordered the war prisoners' territory, the lands, should be given back to them, because those days the people would go to war for a country where they would gain compensation land, as you remember that. So this became a tremendous source for the Iranian, and all Iranian kings, including the Shah that I served with him for 6 years. He recognized what Cyrus has done. It became a part of their obligation to allow all the religious freedom in the country. Every religion in the country during the Shah was absolutely free. In fact, many of those who are not even recognized by Islam, like a Baha'i, his own personal physician was a Baha'i. Many of the Baha'i were in a very high positions of the government. I know, in fact, one of my high council, I had high council in my institute. All 5 of them were appointed by the Shah with imperial decree, and one of them was a Baha'i. And I was the head of that council was a very old gentleman. His name was Mr. Intizam. He had been the president of General Assembly during 1956, the war in Egypt, the Suez War, and he had been Iranian foreign minister, as well as Iranian ambassador to the United States, to Russia, and to France. He was the chairman. He was between me and the Shah. So if I don't go directly, couldn't go see the Shah directly, I will have Mr. Intizam to go and see him and talk to him about issues that I was concerned, because every time that I went overseas, I was supposed to give a report of my observation to the government and to the Shah secretary. But at any rate, the point I'm telling you is this: that the country, you cannot treat a country which was established in 550 BC with a country who was established in the 20th century. All the countries in the Persian Gulf were established, gained their independence during the 20th century. So you cannot, treat the Iranians like you were treating Iraqis or Saudi Arabians. For that, partly because of that civilization, Iranians will not respond to threat. Whenever you threaten them, they will do the opposite. So when you talk about the policy of the policy of carrot and stick policy, you remember that might make sense. But in Iran, they use carrot and stick policy to train their horses. That they resent even referring to this situation like that. Therefore, you ought to know what you're talking about. For example, President Bush, even at the beginning of the fighting against the terrorists, he said he's going to start a crusade. The crusade is the most toxic word in Islamic world that you could ever want to use. But at any rate, so the Iranians, currently it is 3 times larger than France, and it is there has 71 million population, and great majority of these people are highly educated. For that reason, it is impossible that this regime can sell that medieval ideal to them for too long. The Shah, they asked the Shah was very much, his regime was very much connected with the pre-Islamic civilization. Incidentally, pre-Islamic civilization started from 550 BC and ended in 641 AD when Iran was taken over by the Arabs. And they imposed Islam upon the Iranian. So during that period, the Shah took most of his name, even the name of his dynasty is pre-Islamic. Remember in 1971, he celebrated the 2,500-year celebration of the monarchy in Iran. And he spent an enormous amount of money where Iranians resented a great deal while many millions of Iranians were living in poverty at that time. So in his last book, the name of the book is Answer to History. The Shah wrote answering his critic while he kind of put aside Islam and concentrated mainly with the pre-Islamic civilization. He said this, and this I'm quoting directly from him. He said, "For me, it was a simple proposition. The pre-Islamic civilization emphasized good life, good thought, and good deed. The Islamic civilization emphasized avoidance of sin, obligation to take revenge, and glorification of death." These are his exact words. Okay, so you remember, obligation to take revenge is one of them, and this regime is trying to take revenge. There are more Americans killed with Iranian surrogates in Iraq, in Lebanon. I remember 1980, 241 of our Marines were blown up and 360 were wounded, and they were all with American surrogates. American provided the money, provided the weapons, provided the training. 1,000 Revolutionary Guards went to Syria, to southern Lebanon to train the Hezbollah with all kinds of weapons, and all the missiles which were thrown at Israel in 2006 that started a war between Israel and Hezbollah were provided by Iran, and many of them Iranian will buy it from the open market. Basically, they buy the Chinese made so they don't be cut red-handed. So that's a way to avoid being blamed for it. And in fact, many of the current roadside bombs are used by Taliban and in Iraq are made by Iranians, but they don't put their insignia on those bombs. So it is very, very difficult. Now,
sir, are you going to have time to ask you some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me finish just saying this. Let me explain to you. Because of Iranians, great majority of them are impacted by the pre-Islamic civilizations and the liberty and all the freedom they will give to the people. Many of the educated Iranians are moving toward that, and they're taking a step away from Islam. But the less educated are more Muslim and being brainwashed more by Muslim. So let me put it this way, and finally I'm going to tell you this. If tomorrow you allow the Iranians to leave Iran, you open the door and ask them to immigrate to any place in the world they want to immigrate, I guarantee you 80% of them would come to this country. I can tell you this from my personal experience. Here, I come to this country with $635 in my pocket and 40 words in English, and I became advisor to President of the United States. Only in this country, no country on earth would have given me the freedom, the opportunity, and the support to become advisor to President of the United States. And I can tell you, only in America, a person like Barack Obama can dream of becoming the President of the United States and actually making it. And I quote President Reagan, metaphor, this country still is a shining city upon a hill. Thank you.
I can't understand why we have wasted 4,500, 5,000 Americans wiping out a Sunni dictator that was counterbalancing the Iranian theocracy. So that's my question.
First of all, let me tell you about Sunni. I give you history. If President Bush would know about this history, would never invaded Iraq. In spite of the fact that Saddam Hussein was a dictator, he was a vicious criminal, and he was really running a criminal organization. In 760 AD, a man, a warlord from the north province of Iran named Khorasan. I'm going to just point out to it where it is, right here. From Khorasan. He moved against there was a similar Sunni caliph in Damascus. He was very corrupt. He was very similar to Saddam Hussein. And he had issued like about 45% taxes on the people. He moved against them and came to Iran, and he began a lot of forces and went and overthrew the dynasty, the caliph. It is called Bani Umayyad dynasty. And he established a new dynasty called Abbasid dynasty, and he brought all Iranians into. He opened the way for the Iranians to spread their influence westward. And if President Bush would know that history, he would have never invaded Iraq, particularly not knowing what's happening, because everything that he believed, you see, there is always in international relations, there is a gap between perception and reality. You know, our perception was that Saddam Hussein had an atomic bomb. Saddam Hussein was connected with a terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, and we found out that was not true.
Thank you.
Okay, I just have a comment and then a question. Thanks for correctly pointing out that the Brits and the Americans overthrew a democracy in Iran and installed a puppet regime, which is the Shah, which persisted for many years, which led to a whole sequence of events, which is where we are now. So what can the U.S. and their sidekick, the Brits, do to prevent nuclear proliferation?
Could you read it loudly? I've had a cold. I took that cold when I went to talk to all the First Council of San Antonio, Texas, and has affected my hearing. So
okay, I think from a democracy, overthrowing of democracy, to install, to overthrowing the democracy, to installing the puppet regime of the Shah, which led to a sequence of events to where we are now. So the question is, what can the U.S. do, along with the United Nations or Brits and what have you, to stop the nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, Iran in particular?
You know, we have a very limited options. Believe it or not, we have very limited option. The sanction in the United Nations, there are a group of nations who do not believe us that Iran is moving toward the atomic bomb. They call themselves ERIC. It is a BRIC. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. The two of them are members of the Security Council. They don't believe us that Iran is moving to that direction because they are very, very close with the regime and they have immense financial stake in the Iranian society. So in the United Nations, they will veto if we really want to have a very meaningful and workable sanction against Iran. They're going to veto that, or they would remain. They would not vote, and that will send a bad signal to Iranians. And besides, sanctions always hurt the people, not the regime, particularly in the. You remember in the regime in Saddam Hussein, all the sanctions, Saddam and all of his cronies were living in a high life while other people were suffering and their children were dying because of our sanction. I'm sure that the government is thinking of some other options.
One more.
Military option is being considered, but again, it's a very, very nightmarish. I can tell you several reasons that it's not to our interest to go military, but there are possibilities that we can do, depending on the circumstances and the situation. But at present time, we don't have very good option. I'm sorry to tell you that.
We have one last question.
Okay, do you think like the problem, like are these problems over here, right?
Where are you?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Do you think like a lot of these problems are occurring in all
Okay.
this because the U.S. are trying to force new ways upon like the old, this way that's lasted for so long, and because Iran's been around for a long time, the U.S. is not.
Could you repeat the question, please? No, I have the lady.
Like why
I'll try to rephrase it. He asked, do you think some of the problems between the United States and Iran are because the U.S. is trying to force new ways on the old?
They asked Ayatollah Khomeini a question. It was a journalist from Le Monde, France. He said, "Sir, aren't you afraid of American forces?" Ayatollah Khomeini said, "No." He said, "Are you afraid of American sanction?" He said, "Absolutely no." He said, "Then why? What you're afraid of America?" He said, "I'm afraid of America's ideas. We don't like American ideas of freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and all that America tried to impose upon us." So that's the problem. But the great majority of Iranians who are educated through the internet and are very, very savvy with internet, they really like America very much. Believe me, if there was a vote taken tomorrow with the auspices of the United Nations, 85% of Iranians will vote to go and reestablish diplomatic relations with Iran. Iran is a very good natural ally of the United States. It could be very, very good, a good partner for maintaining peace and security in that part of the world.